Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of When Movies Were Good, coming to you live from the Resort Studios, aka my flat, here in Melbourne, Australia. I'm with my usual special guest star, Matt. How are you today?
I'm doing good. I think description Resort Studios at this time of year becomes less and less accurate each time. I got a lot of mud on my pants the last time I played golf, so I know it's definitely not summer resort time.
No, it's not. But I think the resort, when I talk about my flat, is more to do with the state of mind. It's a state of mind.
Mind you, you do have those nice square pebblestone pathways that are designed for hurricane conditions. They're like a lot of hotels I've seen in Bali. So,
yeah.
Architecture-wise, you're halfway there.
Yeah, that's right. And we did manage to survive the big gale storms a few weeks ago here in Melbourne, but we're hoping everyone is doing well and really waiting and ready for, I reckon this is going to be one of our first Ray Milland specials, because knowing me, as time goes on, I'm going to want to do another one.
Yes, Rachel is blushing.
When it comes to Ray, definitely. I am a fan of Ray Milland's. I'm still really exploring his work, but I have to say that my initial interest comes via his stunning appearance, which I just find very attractive. Tall, dashing appearance, and ticks all the boxes for me.
Look, if you get Grace Kelly to have a one-night stand with you, you can't be bad in the looks department.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and I don't blame her, to be honest. But that wasn't why you called. Moving right along, we are doing a Ray Milland double, two of his most well-known films. The earliest one, 1945, The Lost Weekend, well, that's the one he won the Academy Award for, so that would be, I guess, the apex of his work, I guess you could say, but he had such a long and varied career, and there's other roles that he is very well known for, including playing Tony in Dial M for Murder, directed by the fantastic Alfred Hitchcock, 1954. So these aren't sort of ones off the beaten path. These are two of his most well-known films, but they're two of the good ones to start with when it comes to Ray Milland. So, Matt, I'm just going to go through some brief details about Ray Milland, aka Alfred Reginald Jones. He was born on the 3rd of January 1907 and he passed away in March 1986. So he was British American. He did originally hail from Wales, and he actually takes his stage name from, I'm not sure where he got Ray from, but Milland is due to the area of Wales that he lived in. It was called the Millands. So that's where he got the name from. And it stuck, it suited him. I think sort of Alfred Jones would have been fine as well, but we do know and love him as Ray Milland. He had a very long and varied career and was pretty much acting right up until the mid-80s when he did pass away.
Well, we both saw that great role he did in Columbo, where he was a murderer.
Yeah, I had a great time. And he was in the 70s, he was in the 80s, he was in the 60s, he had his own TV show in the 50s. So he really he was in musicals, he did this, he was in the army. He was really someone that lived life to the fullest. I'm sure he did have a few regrets. He did marry...
cigarettes for one.
Yeah, exactly. And also probably some extramarital relationships, and I do believe his son had some issues as well. So before Ray became an actor, so he did start his career in the UK, and he was sort of poached and went over to Hollywood, began his career there, then went back to the UK for a little bit after he got married because his acting career wasn't working out in Hollywood, and then managed to come back to Hollywood, was working some just regular jobs, got spotted for another film, and then basically started and finished as an actor after that. But he was in the Household Cavalry of the British Army. And
that sounds like the most British thing you can do.
It is. Matt and I were just talking about this. We weren't not sure, but I believe the Household Cavalry was sort of like I don't know if it was like an inland army, or it was like they were the people who like defended the homeland, or I'm sure there's...
I'm not sure. I know the actual cavalry regiments, the ones that were on horseback during the 19th century doing the charges, most of them probably by the 20s were being converted into like tank and Air Force units. when you say Household Cavalry, I'm guessing like maybe it's an elite guard, or like maybe it's the people that do those parades on the big street outside Buckingham Palace. I don't know, but then I'd have thought that would have been like one of the more high-end jobs that they'd go to the more experienced chaps, but I don't know.
No, you're actually right about that. I've just gone into a bit of information about them. So the Household Cavalry is part of the Household Division and is the Queen's official bodyguard.
Okay.
So that would have been, although the Household Cavalry Regiment is armoured, it's not part of the Royal Armoured Corps. So that would be, so Ray began his life essentially after sort of finishing his schooling and stuff, doing that, and then got into acting. And of course, his first major role was in The Flying Scotsman, which I would love to see, 1925.
I'd like to ride the train.
Yeah, which was a partial film that was silent film, partial talkie, I believe. And
that's what they used to use that as like an advertising novelty, as a part talkie. You'd be going silent and then going to sound, kind of like how in Wizard of Oz they went from black and white to colour in the one film. Oh,
right, yeah. It seems like an interesting concept, but I guess back then that was sort of the bridge between silent and full talkies. So
it was probably cheaper to only do it part of the time.
Oh, yes, that too. It's just exactly the reason why some films in the 60s and stuff was still shot in black and white, or some TV shows were, because there was a cost element involved until everything switched over formally. So, and then he went over to Hollywood, as Matt and I just love these stories of people who go to Hollywood, and started his career and worked with Dorothy Lamour and Deanna Durbin, and he was a little bit up and down at the start, but once he sort of came back and got into doing things like Beau Guest and The Major and the Minor, which was one of Billy Wilder's first films, The Uninvited, which I would love to see, Fritz Lang's Ministry of Fear, The Thief, which I have seen, which I did enjoy. And he worked with some of the all-time greats. So he worked with Grace Kelly in more than one way, I guess, Lana Turner, Marlene Dietrich, Ginger Rogers, Jane Wyman, who I love, Loretta Young, and Veronica Lake. So he is technically a Welshman, technically British, and I think he kind of billed himself as British-American, but he obviously had films where he was British and other films where he was American. So in the films that we are talking about, he was American in the first film, The Lost Weekend, and then British in the second film. So let's get into The Lost Weekend. So this is the film that really sort of demonstrated Ray's acting chops, I guess you could say. Matt, what were your thoughts on this one?
Well, I loved it very much. I was actually nervous when I was getting ready to see it, because first I saw Dial-In for Murder, and on the DVD I had, they've included an extra documentary where they interviewed a few filmmakers and writers about the film, and one of them was Peter Bogdanovich, who was an earlier, a later associate of Orson Welles, and he was quite dismissive of his role in The Lost Weekend, thinking it was too hammed up and that his superior role was in Dial-In for Murder. And now I feel like I'm starting to get into a very high-profile fight, because, yes, I agree, his performance in Dial-In for Murder was extremely powerful and I love it, but I think The Lost Weekend is an absolutely fantastic movie, and Ray Milland was fantastic in it. I mean, granted, it ends with a dramatic speech, which is probably not so fashionable, and but the fact is that everything that he's doing hammed up and sort of all his bullshit lines are because he's playing an alcoholic that's putting on bullshit for his brother and fiance.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of read that the first cut of the film had a different musical score to it, so the audience didn't know how to take it, but once the...
there was a lot of experimental features throughout the film, with special effects on the... to get into his drunk state of mind and his desperation for a drink. Yeah,
so just for the audience who, obviously we would recommend you see this film, but essentially it's about an alcoholic writer called Don Burnham, and he's supposed to be going on a weekend vacation with his brother Wick. That doesn't eventuate. It's one sort of disaster after the other, but essentially it's about this weekend he has, going from one extreme to the other, recalling earlier events in his life, ending up in sort of like the drunk tank at the local hospital. And then towards the end of the film, with the help of Jane Wyman, who's playing his, long-suffering girlfriend, Helen, he sort of resolves to try and finally put this behind him in a way that he hasn't done so before. So it is really Ray Milland's film. Everyone in the film's really good. And the director,
Billy Wilder, who, well, hello, needs no introduction. Like you said, Matt, there's a lot of experimentation in this film. Well, yeah, I mean, like, the favourite part I have is when he's at the opera and he's having one of his early times when he had an unhealthy obsession with a drink, and they're going through the drinking song from La Traviata.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's what it was, La Traviata. Okay, yeah.
Yes, by Giuseppe Verdi.
Yeah. Matt's a bit of an opera buff as well.
Yes, that's right. And they're going through that song, and obviously he's in a drinking state of mind because they're singing about drinking, and suddenly he pictures them as these overcoats, all of them, with a bottle hidden inside. And I thought it was quite clever. It was almost getting into the territory of like what we saw Hitchcock doing in Vertigo 20 years later with the delusional state of Jimmy Stewart's mind in that film. So I thought it was quite clever how they were using those special effects and the alternative soundtrack because they often had a lot of these sort of spooky, ghouly sounds.
Yeah.
So I think it was quite progressive in a way for showing sympathy of someone in that situation. And it is actually, believe it or not, a film noir. And that's how the genre can get so confusing, because although it's often about sort of pulp fiction crime stories, it isn't necessarily. It's about people going through these hardships of experience.
Yes.
With some certain characteristic special features, like in the hospital, there is where we see the wire fence shadow going over Ray's face. That is easily comparable to certain scenes like in Strangers on a Train, where someone's hiding behind bars.
Yes.
So it is a powerful genre that can cover a lot of angles, and it's not just a sort of bang crime story.
Yeah, I mean, it is sort of an emotional story as well. And there are lots of people sort of, someone who's an alcoholic, there are, people that enable them. There are people that try and stop them. There are many different, and everyone was very aware of his character, Don, and, the people he would come across in the bar, the bartenders, the other people in the apartment building where he lived. Everyone was very aware of this destructive habit that this man had. And even back then, they did refer to it as an illness, as a sickness. It's wasn't obviously as understood as it is now. But I thought the sort of sequence of him in the hospital, where he thought, was it the mouse was eating the
Yeah, I don't actually. I probably should have looked that up, but is that actually a symptom of alcohol dependency?
It is, yeah. It's called the DTs. So it's, basically you're having a lot of visions and things that you're seeing that are there but they're not type thing. And I have seen a few other films where the characters are suffering the DTs as well. And it's sort of like if you can kind of get through that and then start coming off the alcohol, you can get through it a bit, but you've really drunk yourself into a state if you're at that point, though. Yeah. Yeah,
it is, like you say, an illness for some people. Like we talk about because it's like people who say, "Oh, I'm a little OCD," when they say they can't let go of not cleaning the carpet on a Saturday morning, but no. OCD is a genuine mental illness or a genuine medical problem where you have panic attacks over such a random thing. So it's disrespectful to use it as an excuse to just be stubborn.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's sort of an interesting film, and I guess at the time it was considered a hard-hitting film too, but it did do quite well, and it's definitely got its place in, classic cinema history. It was sort of one of the first films that did try to explore the nature of, you have to remember what the culture was in the 1940s. Anyone that was an alcoholic, or they were either functioning or was hidden away by their family. So I guess to have a film with it such in the forefront was quite sort of groundbreaking at the time. But I think Ray did a fantastic job in the film, as did Billy Wilder as the director. And I really enjoyed Jane Wyman. I mean, obviously, being a fan of 80s soaps, I'm a fan of Jane Wyman from Falcon Crest. But it just goes to show you, because she was quite manly in her later years. She was very skinny and very sort of, at least in the role she was playing in that film. And it was nice to sort of see her in a more, you know, not matronly role, but just in the more traditional, strong, headstrong sort of partner to a very man who's hell bent on destruction, I guess.
I reckon there was a lot of deliberate symbolism in that leopard coat.
Yes, I think so. I mean, look, the thing is with The Lost Weekend, it's one of those films you could probably watch several times and get something new out of it every single time you watched it.
Well, another movie I'd like us to one day discuss is The Country Girl, The Country Girl. Mm-hmm. That was with Bing Crosby and Grace Kelly, and that was made about 10 years after this one, and it's one of the few non-musical roles Bing Crosby ever had, and he did that superbly, where he's playing a struggling alcoholic as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I'm open to see that. I'm always happy to see anything with Grace Kelly in it. So just to sort of finish up on this, just a couple of little interesting tidbits. Olivia de Havilland was originally considered to play Helen, Jane Wyman's character, but that she was, of course, involved in that famous lawsuit that she was in at the time. Also, Kate Hepburn and Jean Arthur were considered for the role.
Katharine Hepburn would have actually done pretty well in that role, I think.
Yeah, she would have done, actually. So the majority of the film, at least the insides, were shot at Paramount in Hollywood. But they did go to New York City because Billy Wilder wanted that authenticity of him actually walking the New York City streets. And I was actually just amazed at how built up New York City was even back in the mid-40s. I mean, it still was a sprawling metropolis even then.
Well, when you go to New York now, you realise how much of it is 19th to early 20th century city. A lot of those structures, as you see with the rail line and the street fronts with the pawn shops, a lot of it's quite similar in many places.
Yeah. So we're going to jump out now. Obviously, with any Alfred Hitchcock movie, you could literally sit there for 3 hours and discuss it. But we're going to briefly discuss Dial M for Murder, because this is a bit about towards Ray rather than the great Hitch himself. So this was a very well-known stage play beforehand.
Yeah, well, I really envy the playwright Frederick Knott, and I think I talked about this before. He wrote Dial M for Murder and 2 other plays, which just became such cult implies a niche audience. They became such overwhelming hits that he was able to live on the royalties of it for all his life in quite good comfort, even though he got screwed out of the rights for Dial M for Murder, which is how they managed to make A Perfect Murder with Michael Douglas many decades later, and he didn't get a cent for it. But, the stories were that successful.
Oh, one was Wait Until Dark, and then the other one was Write Me a Murder. Is that the other ones?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. So definitely a very famous play that Matt worked on, and I did see the production of you were the assistant director on that one, or?
Director's assistant. Technically there is a difference, but they probably don't need to know about that here. Our audience, they are interested in other matters.
Yes, but it was an entertaining production of that, and it was a beautiful looking stage, beautiful production design, and some interesting performances, we would say.
Yes. That is all we will say.
That is all we will say. But it was, I did enjoy the show, and I was very proud of Matt's work in it. So essentially, Dial M for Murder is, Ray's the male lead in this, but his female co-star is one of the icons of classic cinema and someone whom Ray was very fond of. Personally, I would say.
Oh, yes.
I don't think his wife was, but he was. It wasn't a relationship that was meant to be, but I do believe they did have a good time together. So Robert Cummings was in it as well, and John Williams. So essentially, Tony's an English retired tennis player. He's married to Margot, who's a wealthy socialite. She has an affair with crime fiction writer Mark Halliday. Tony knows about all of this and basically wants to have Margot killed so he can inherit her fortune. That's the basics of it. We won't give too much away if you haven't seen it. You really do need to follow it because there's lots of clues and who did this and who did that and who knew what when and who got blamed for this and all the rest of it, and someone left a key here and someone did that. So you really do need to sort of pay attention to it, but it is a sort of classic thriller, whodunit. Matt, what are your thoughts on this film?
Well, I think that definitely falls into the category of the drawing room mystery, and I think it's one of the best you could have. The dialogue is just so... It just really pulls you in. The same way that the person who ends up being drawn into attempting to commit a murder, the same way the audience is drawn into this very cunning plan by Ray, and he does it perfectly. He's such a charmer. He makes everybody like him, and so even though he got to fame as a sporting star, it's that sort of smile and charm that would have gotten the hand of Margot behind the scenes.
I'll say. I don't know. Was Ray a bit too old for the role, or was Grace Kelly too young for the role?
Well, I don't know about in terms of Grace and Ray's respective ages. I mean, obviously they managed to get an attraction to each other in real life, but I'm thinking more that if he's meant to be a recently retired tennis player, now it's a bit different now because, and we've talked about this before, the likes of...
Oh, sorry, that's my phone, sorry.
Siri, this is a two-person show, thank you very much.
I hate Google Assistant, but anyway.
Oh, Google Assistant. Oh, great, now we have two phones trying to rival us. But yeah, and God, I forgot my point.
You were saying about sorry, that's totally my... And we do shoot this live, folks. We don't edit. No, we were talking about... you were saying about a recently retired tennis player.
Oh, yeah, like... Yes, you have Roger Federer now, who's like 37 or something, and he's still playing, but he gets paid a lot, and he's able to take longer breaks between sessions. At that time, you were pretty much over the hill by 30, so I think Ray may have just been a bit too old for it, but you could get away with it. Yeah,
because Ray would have been in his late 40s at that time.
Oh, yeah. Way too old. Yeah. Like a tennis player, especially as back then, it wasn't until like in the 60s or 70s that they really started introducing proper salaries for sportsmen, even at the most elite levels. And so by your 30, you'd have to be making some sort of living no matter
it wasn't really until sort of the 80s that people were becoming rich from tennis. And back then at 30, you were pretty much done. Now the game of tennis has changed. So you've got, 3 big champions in their mid to late 30s, but that's not how tennis was. So I agree with you there.
I'll bet television had a big role in that, probably because as sports events became more televised, there were opportunities for sponsors to come in.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, his character, it's interesting that they set him up as this sort of... But then again, that would go to the competitiveness and the brutality of the character just being so competitive and I'm just going to get rid of my wife so I can have the money sort of thing. So there's a bit of backstabbing and stuff. And Ray was very strong in this film, and I thought Grace Kelly was pretty good in it as well.
Yeah, way more... Well, I think we talked about her in High Noon. Yes, we did. High Noon was one we did a while back in the Gary Cooper episode, and it was a great beginning role, but she really comes into her own here, and she'd do even better in To Catch a Thief.
Yeah, she does, and she's such a stunning woman, and, I know it's horrible to say because she got married to the man and had a family with him, and yes, it was very tragic when she died, but I just why would you have gone to Monaco when you could... You had this great acting career, and her Ray, Ronier...
and, of course, that would never happen again.
Yeah.
You know who we're talking about.
Yeah. But her Ray, Ronier, or Ray as she called him, Prince Ronier, he didn't want a bar of her going back to acting. So I think even Hitchcock had tried to lure her back from Monaco, or Monaco, however you say it. And
even the general population of Monaco apparently were thought it was scandalous for their princess to be suddenly acting in Hollywood.
Yeah, I for the life of me, I've seen a few movies, I've read a few things about Grace Kelly. I don't understand why she got married to Ray because I don't think I think her and the other Ray would have had a better marriage, despite their age difference. But I just don't think her and Ronnier had much in common. So anytime I see Grace Kelly, I just think, why would you have left your great career to go and sit in a palace? I don't get it, but, who knows?
It was probably a fantasy going into at the time, and probably got swept off her feet by Renier at the time, even though it didn't work out. And their marriage ended up being quite strange, wasn't it?
It really was. I think she just kind of stayed with him out of duty, and obviously she had 3 children with him, and I guess in Monaco they have to have like their line of succession, otherwise Monaco could go back into France. That's what I understand it to be. So,
I do remember reading something about that.
So if the lineage, if they don't have like strong heirs to take it over, then Monaco could essentially go back into the rest of France. So maybe Ray explained that to her, and obviously Albert is now, now the head of the family and all the rest of it. And
that could almost be made into some sort of operetta plot where you have a corrupt envoy from France who wants to absorb Monaco back into them so they can take into their treasury the Monaco casinos, and there's another lover for the princess's hand and something. I mean, it's basically the plot of The Merry Widow.
Well, oh, is it? Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, well, I mean, I'd love to visit there, and that's essentially where... Oh, it's interesting. Wasn't To Catch a Thief primarily set in Monaco? Was it Monaco?
I thought that was in the south of France.
The French Riviera, so not too far away from there. But it's amazing that she would end up there, and those sort of roads that they were driving around, her life would essentially end on one of those roads. And the conspiracy is, who was driving the car type thing. But, I mean, you do see a bit of her and her children, and, who's to say? Obviously, her and Ray had a very close relationship. I think Ray was thinking of leaving his wife at one point, and the wife said, well, I'll take you for everything you have, and that was the end of that. So they went in different directions. There was too much of an age difference between them anyway, because I think about 20 plus years, I'd say, because Grace would have been in her sort of mid-20s and he was in his late 40s. So, yeah, interesting. But I did look, two of his very well-known films, I just love him. So I'm happy to watch Ray Till the Cows Come Home, and just reading through some of his back catalogues of films, I really want to see Beau Guest. There's so many other films, and even some of the trashy films he did in the 60s and 70s, definitely would like to sit through those as well.
Look, one of those gifts that keeps on giving.
Also, but...
Well, yeah, perhaps in a different way for you.
Yeah, but he's just, I would say he would be my favourite male classic film actor. But I just love him because he just wanted to act. He was this guy from a little village in Wales, and he was in the army, and he was a great shot and all the rest of it, and he just pursued and tried to improve his skills, and he just wanted to work. And the fact that he just worked right up until sort of the mid-80s or so before he died, I mean, not the last few years of his life, but he was acting right up until the early 80s. And, some people just gave up on their careers, but he never did. He took on all different roles like Columbo, all sorts of things, TV shows, you name it, all bit parts in films, whatever. He
certainly didn't just throw his talent away for that role. Like, he was just as good as Dial for Murder, I think, in his Columbo appearance.
Yeah, no, he was fantastic. And, I know he had some family problems, sadly, but he, stayed with his wife and had this career and worked on it. And good for him. I just love people that want to work and get up there and do it. And I'm a big fan of actors that just keep on going and take what roles they can get and enjoy the process. So anything else you'd like to add?
To this particular film?
To this particular one, before we introduce...
Well, I did actually just think when you said that he was a great shot in the army, and I think that would be the best pun for a film magazine of Ray Milland, a great shot to be shot at or something or other. Look, I'll have to work on that one, but yeah, there's some sort of pun there just occurred to me.
Oh, I've got a few puns, but I won't share any of them.
Well, this is one of my desert island films, definitely. I think I've seen it since I was about 14 or so. I've probably seen it about 10 times.
It's you can't really go wrong with Alfred Hitchcock. Even some of his weaker films are still extremely strong compared to some other people out there. So, yeah.
Like, I'll try not to talk too much about Hitchcock for this one because really it's an episode about Ray, but definitely Hitchcock was quite dismissive of this film simply because he felt like all he did was plagiarize the play because he was literally just doing it to get through a contract obligation.
That's right.
But
I remember that.
he put a lot of his special spin into it, even though he didn't appreciate his own talent.
Obviously, for me, Psycho will always be my favourite Hitchcock film, but I did like this one. Probably because of the lead actor mostly, but it's a rollicking film. It's a bit of fun. Grace is fantastic, and it's a beautiful looking film, as pretty much all of Alfred Hitchcock's films are. So we did enjoy this one. I'm sure we will revisit Ray sometime in the future, but there's so many other people to talk about. And for our next episode, we are going to discuss. We got a request to discuss some Rod Steiger films. And
yes, our first one.
Yeah, our first one. I said to Matt, oh my gosh, that means some people are listening to us. This is great.
Well, it is reassuring.
It is reassuring. And, you always have to start off very slow. Sometimes you see people on YouTube channels and stuff and they've got X amount of followers, but they've been at it for 10 years. And if you look at their first videos, they're kind of probably very similar to our first videos, but you just have to do it for the love of it, and that's why we do it. Like, we're going to watch these films anyway. Why not get together and discuss them and record it? So,
well, I just regard it as our normal dinners and coffee meetings. We just happen to have a microphone nearby.
Yeah, pretty much, So we're going to do Rod Steiger, the great character, another person that was a workhorse as well and worked all through his career. We're going to do two of his most well-known films, even if they're known for other things rather than so much his role in them, but he is in these films. So On the Waterfront, which is primarily known as Marlon Brando's film, 1954. And
I could have been a contender. Had to do it.
And Fred Gwynne's in that film. So no mentions for Larry on this one, although I'm sure his mother knew Grace Kelly, but we'll leave it. We'll leave it at that, and Ray and all the rest of them. So we've got On the Waterfront, 1954. That does have Rod Steiger in it in a supporting role. And then The Harder They Fall, which is sort of a boxing film. I wasn't actually really aware of this film, but it's got Bogey in it.
Yeah, and so unintentionally, but both these films with Rod Steiger have a bit of a fixing the corruption of boxing theme. Yeah,
so I saw On the Waterfront when I was a teenager because Fred Gwynne was in it. So I don't really have that many memories of it. So I'm looking forward to rewatching that again. I might watch that with my mum, actually, because she's a big Marlon Brando fan. And then The Harder They Fall, I'm just going to approach that one with an open mind too.
Yeah, and that'll be probably one of my first non-trench coat Humphrey Bogart films as well.
Yeah,
I mean, he'll probably will still be wearing one, but not as a detective.
Yes, I'm just going to approach that one with an open mind. I sort of like a bit of martial arts and boxing, so I'm sure I'll find both of them interesting. So now we always forget to do this, our social media. I think we're going to have to probably record something and slot it in at the start, Matt, because I always forget.
Yeah, well, you know what, we'll work it out. But yeah, for those that have listened all the way to the end, we appreciate it. Thank you, and you can get even more of us on time by following us on social media on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and so the moment you hear about one of our releases, you'll just be able to tap onto the link and hear more.
Well, thank you so much for that, and we thank you for being with us. We're sort of here in a cold, dreary Melbourne night. It is, well, Australia's version of cold. Anyway, the southern part of Australia does actually have quite cold weather. But so in the meantime, we look forward to catching up with you all again very soon for one of our fireside chats. But in the meantime, I'm Rachel.
I'm Matthew. Yeah, we do need a fireplace.
We do, actually. I've got some candles going. And we're watching good movies. Thank you and good night.